2,400 years ago. Socrates, Plato, and then Aristotle, 2,400 years ago. Socrates, Plato, and then Aristotle. Socrates, Plato. He founded the academy at age 40 in order to set forth his ideas, and during that time he wrote The Republic, his most famous work and the major announcement of his entire political philosophy. Plato's purpose in writing The Republic was to bring philosophy to politics, to uplift politics, to inject into politics vision and character. Those ideas were justice, goodness, and beauty, and truth, but perhaps above all of power. 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 Power, because this is, of course, at the center of political philosophy. What is justice? And slides into more and more consideration of power. Dialogue. Key question, what is justice? Power. 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 Socrates, Plato, and then Aristotle. Power. Power. Socrates says right conduct cannot mean ever to inflict harm on another person. Justice or right conduct must always mean to elicit the very best from an individual, to treat that individual in a way that that individual is uplifted or humanized as a result of that interaction. Just behavior, right conduct, must mean always then trying to bring out one's arete or one's particular gift, one's excellence. Right conduct or just conduct, Socrates says, does not mean an eye for an eye. It means dealing with others in a humane manner.
Empedocles, of whom little is known, argued, according to Plato, that might is right. It is natural for human beings to be driven by the will to power. Thrasymachus, and he was also an actual sophist, Thrasymachus gets extremely impatient. He's rude, he's rough, he's tough, he's confrontational, and he says that what men call justice is very simply the will of the stronger, or actually the strongest man, the strongest state, the strongest party within a state at any given point. Whoever wins calls what he's done justice, and that's it, and get rid of your illusions. And this helps explain why Socrates reacted so strongly in favor of a logical argument for morality. Morality must be established as something which inheres in nature. Not the kind of nature the Ionians and the Sophists were talking about, not physical nature, but in the physis of the spiritual world, the spiritual nature which Socrates and Plato saw as the primary reality.
Call them forms. Virtue itself is a form. The true being of virtue is a form. What we're asking for when we ask what is virtue is a form. We're asking for an unchanging essence of virtue. Well, the true being of virtue has to have two features. First of all, it's one thing, not many. There's many, many different virtuous acts. There's many kinds of virtues, but there's only one form or essence of virtue. Right? He wants that one thing which governs or gives form to, or gives identity and nature to the many acts of virtue. So the one form of virtue forms all the many. It's one form. And secondly, it's an unchanging form, right? The form of virtue doesn't change. Virtue is really fundamentally the same thing now as it was back in Plato's time. Some aspects of virtue in history have changed, right? What makes a good American is different than what makes a good Athenian. But virtue itself has not changed. Virtue itself is eternal, right? So there you have this notion of a deep or high or fundamental true being which is unchanging and eternal, deeper than the changes of the historical world and more true than the appearances of history and culture and all those things. Because the chalk triangle, in a sense, is not a real triangle. Now, what have we just said? What is a real triangle, then? Right? Not a cardboard cutout, not a shadow, not a reflection, but the real thing. Just look right at it and see what the essence, the form, the true being of a tree is. Or the essence, form, true being of a triangle. Or, and this is the most important thing, the essence, form, or true being of virtue, of justice, of the good. In fact, the good is the last thing you see, because the good is the sun itself, the shining light which gives light to everything else. The first principle, the supreme being, Plato calls it the good. In religious terms, you could call it the supreme good. And indeed, Christian theologians would come along later and say, the supreme good, that's God, right? The source of being, just as the sun is what makes possible the life of plants and animals on earth, right? It gives being to these things, but also intelligibility. It makes it possible for us to see them, right? The kind of light of the mind which makes it possible for us to see. So that's what happens in education. Then something else happens. You can't stay up there, not until you die. We'll get to that next lecture. You can't stay up there in the other world where all is light and unchanging truth. You eventually have to go back down to the cave by teaching them what true virtue is. Actually, they have to see it for themselves, right? This is clear. You can't just be told what true virtue is. You have to climb up yourself, right? With the help of a teacher, who might maybe someone like Socrates, who asks you questions, what is true virtue? And you find the answer for yourself. You see it for yourself. You understand it for yourself. See it with your own mind's eye. You see it for yourself. And then, if you're following Plato's program of education, you get dragged back down into the cave and made to be king. That's the idea. Because Plato wants people ruling in the Republic who know what the good is, who know what true justice is, who know what true virtue is. You have to know some metaphysics in order to be a good ruler, Plato thinks. Because you have to know what virtue and justice and goodness truly are. That's why Plato has this program of education in the center of his treatise on politics in the Republic. And the center of it, of that treatment of education, is the vision of the true being of the forms. So you come back down into the cave. First thing that happens is, once again, your eyes have to adjust, right? You've been getting used to seeing things in the bright light of day. You get back down in the cave, and your eyes are darkened. You can't see anything. You stumble around. You act like a philosopher, right? The kind of people who fall down into wells because they're contemplating the sky. That was the first philosopher, Thales. Famous joke about him. Looking at the heavens, fell down a well. Philosophers are like that. They're people who've seen the light and now have to adjust to the darkness of what we call the real world. They're not good at making money. Socrates wasn't. Right? They're not good at playing political power games. Socrates wasn't. They don't teach the sort of things that sophists teach. Right? Sophists are good at political power games. Socrates is not. But the kind of person you want to really rule the city is not the sophists, not the people who believe in political power games, not the political consultants and the people who listen to political consultants. You don't want them. You want the people who've seen what the true good really is. You want people like Socrates, right? Now, Socrates avoided political office, but Plato is thinking, if you have someone like a Socrates in your midst, what you do with him is you make him king. You say, you have to rule over us because you understand more about this than we do. Even if you don't think you know what true virtue is, at least you're asking the question. And Plato thinks that, in fact, you can ask this question and you can guide young people to begin to get the answer, to actually see what true virtue is, and thus, once they've seen it, you drag them back down into the cave, you make them rule over you. You make philosophers into kings. That's the key idea of Plato's political theory. So, not only is Plato inventing this new form of philosophy called metaphysics, he's saying it's the real basis of human life. If it's going to be well-ordered human life. It's the basis of ethics, the basis of politics. The person you want to have power is the one who actually understands what the true good really is. True being, knowledge of true being, is what's really practical if what we want is a good life, a life in the city or the republic that is worth living. So you want to make philosophers kings. Aristotle, I suggested, was as great a mind as they come. He invented all sorts of disciplines of human inquiry, including logic, much of what we call biology. He also gave a name to disciplines of inquiry which had already existed, but which never got systematized until Aristotle got a hold of them. He gave us the name metaphysics, for what Plato was doing with forms. He also gave us the notion of ethics as inquiry into the good. If metaphysics is inquiry into true being, then ethics is inquiry into the true good. Right? So metaphysics is to being as ethics is to good. So Aristotle's ethics is an inquiry into what's the good. What is the good for human beings? And Aristotle emphasizes that point. Just as he wants to take these Platonic forms and bring them to earth, as in the famous picture with Raphael, and Plato's pointing up and Aristotle's pointing out. Well, likewise, Aristotle wants to bring the good down to earth. He wants to talk about what is the good for human beings. He's not interested in that vision of the good outside of the cave up there in this kind of heavenly, otherworldly vision. He wants to know what is the good for human beings. What is the good that human action can obtain? Now, when he talks about the good, he once again, as so often in Greek thought, is using a familiar word in a rather different way than we're familiar with. For Aristotle, every good has the character of an end, in Aristotle's sense of final cause, a purpose. Whenever you're trying to do something, you're trying to achieve some good. If you're building a house, the good toward which you're aiming is a house, right? If you're looking for food, the good for which you are looking is food, right? And you're always looking for something good, right? You're looking for food, you want good food, not bad food. You're building a house, you want to build a good house, not a bad house. So the end of every process has the character of a good. Or at least it's what we want out of that process is a good version of the end of that process. We want a good house, we want good food. So the good for Aristotle has the character of an end, that for the sake of which we do something. So the question, what is the good for human beings, boils down to the question, what is the end, that is the goal or purpose of human life? What is our good? What is our end? What are we aiming for as humans? What is it that, simply because we're human, we aim for? Now, in one sense then, this question's fairly easy to answer. What is it that human beings aim for? Aristotle in one of his early works says, well, look, don't we all want to be happy? Isn't it obvious? Isn't it necessary? Everyone wants to be happy, right? Happiness is an end that we aim for, right? It's the goal of a lot of the processes we engage in, right? And not only is it the end, it is the final end, the last end. Once you're happy, you're not looking for anything else, right? You look for food or a house or any of these other things in order to be happy with it. So happiness is a word that designates the end that you get to, and you want this for its own sake. It's not a means, it's an end. That's language that Aristotle will use, right? Happiness is never a means to some other end, right? It's an end in itself, which is what he means by a final end, right? Once you're there, you've got what you want, and you don't want this for the sake of something else, you want it for its own sake. That's happiness. Okay. However, once again, the word happiness does not mean for Aristotle quite the same thing that it means for us. Our word happiness translates a Greek word eudaimonia, which does not necessarily designate a feeling. Happiness designates, for most of us, a feeling, right? When we say, I'm happy, we mean, I feel happy. For Aristotle and for all of Greek language, the word for happiness designated something more like success, right? So think of success when Aristotle talks about happiness, right? What makes a life a real success?
All right, I want to thank INSOC for playing tonight. Thank y'all for coming out tonight. Stick around and have some fun.